So, good afternoon. I'm Mr. Clinton, and I'll be taking you through this topic, sampling or sampling distribution. So, let me add here distribution. So, we'll start by the first part of it, the definition. So, we'll have to define what is sampling. So, sampling, by definition, sampling is the process of selecting a subset into bracket sample from the larger population. So sampling is the process of selecting a subset or sample from a larger population. So like you want to do a study and we have an entire population, the entire group to select our sample from. So the process of selecting this sample is what we call what? Sampling. So sampling is simply the process. So underline the term process. That will lead us to the second part of it, that is definition of what? Terms. So under definition of terms, we will be having several terms to define. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So term 1 we will be having a subset, term 2 will define what's a sample, term 3 that will be a population, then term 4 that will be a sample unit or sampling unit. You can also call it sampling unit, not sample unit. Sampling unit. Then we'll be having a sample size and sample frame. So by the first part, we'll define what a subset is. So a subset in sampling, subset means what? It refers to the sample that is selected from a larger population. For example, you have a population where you want to conduct your study. Now that a small section of the population that you select to do your research, that is what we call what? A subset. The number 2, we'll talk about a sample. Now a sample is a subset of the population. We said a subset refers to the sample of the selected population. Yet now sample is the what? The subset. Meaning there's a correlation between a subset and what? A sample. In a nutshell, a subset and a sample means the same thing. So a sample is the subset of the population or the set aside part of the population where the research or the study is to be conducted. So simply that's what a sample means. Then term number 3, we're going to talk about population. Now population simply is the entire group of individual items or data that you want to study or draw a conclusion from. Like the entire population. For example, in this institution, TTNP, now the entire number of staff and students, both teaching and non-teaching, that's what we call the population of TTNP. So for example, if we were to do a study, or we were to do a research, conduct a research in this institution, so our target population will be either be the staff, either the teaching, non-teaching, or the students. So if we decide to go with the teaching staff, now the entire teaching staff will be our population. If we decide to do with the non-teaching staff, then the entire non-teaching staff will be our population. Then if it's about the students, then all the students will be our population. So in a nutshell, a population is the entire group of individuals or items or data that you want to study or draw a conclusion. So when we say you draw a conclusion is the end product of each and every study, there must be what? A conclusion. So when you're doing a research, there must be an end product, and that is what? A conclusion. Most of this is all about the inferential statistics. Number 4, we'll be having sampling unit. Now, sampling unit is the individual element or group of elements considered for selection during the study process. Sampling unit, it is the individual elements or groups of elements considered for selection during the sampling process. So for example, we want to do a study, maybe based on the, let me select an easy example, just within the institution, maybe, let's say we want to do a study about exam malpractice in the institution. Then we can categorize, now our population will be the entire CIT, TTNP student fraternity. So the entire student body will be our population. Now from the population, now we want to get a sampling unit. Sampling unit is we can sample specific departments. For example, how many departments do we have in the school? So we are having like 9 departments, that is ICT, liberal, applied science, business, hospitality, tourism, animation and so forth. We still have a town campus. So assume we were to conduct a study or a research about exam malpractices in the institution. Now, our population will be the entire school, the entire number of students there in the institution. Now, our sample unit, now we can sample further. Let's take applied science department. So, our applied science department may be as well our sample unit. Now, from the entire population of TTNP, now we'll select applied science as a department, as what? A sample unit, meaning it is in that unit where we are going to conduct our study. So not from the entire population of TTNP, but from the entire population of TTNP, we now narrow down to a specific department. Now that's what we call a sampling unit. Then item number 5, we'll be having sample size. Now sample size and also sample unit, they don't have that bigger difference. So but sample size is the number of sampling units selected from the population to form what? The sample. Underline the number of sampling units. So up here I've said sampling is just the selection for the entire population, the unit you select to conduct your studies. Now number 2, we talk about sample size. Now sample size, we're being told it is the number of sampling units. Now, still using the same example of TTNP or the entire TTNP as an institution. Now the entire population or the entire body of the student, that will be our population. Now when conducting a study, for example, that exam malpractices, maybe we narrow down. Now we narrow down how many departments are we having. And I said before that we're having 9 departments. Now those 9 departments, we have ICT, liberal, applied science, and so on and so forth. So when we decide to take now one department for study, now that's what we call a sampling unit. Now sample size is the number of sampling units. For example, now if we take 2 departments, for example, ICT department and applied science department, now it will mean that we'll be having 2 sample size. That is 2 department, applied science and ICT department. So now our sampling unit will be 2. So it depends with how you categorize your population to get the sampling unit. Then lastly, on the definition of terms, we want to define what? Sample frame. Now, sample frame simply is, it is the list of all elements from which the sample is drawn. Now we have the elements. For example, the elements we're having, we want to conduct a study, maybe on the number of the students we are having. Now we will derive that list from where? Registry is where we get all the list, all the database where the entire population of the CIT or TTNP student number is. So that list that contains the number of what? The elements. Now elements now is an individual specimen for study. Now for example, we might be having entire comrades, some entire student, but now the elements now individual specific student by its name. Now the student so and so, student X, that will be the element. Now here the entire population, now when we narrow down, will come on what? We'll define what an element is, of which I'll show you what the element is, and those are things a sample design. Now an element is a specific, for example, in the entire population, but we have a student X called so and so of admission, so and so. Now when we talk about sample frame, it is the list of all the elements from which the sample size is drawn. So this can as well be list or what? Database. Database where all the sample elements are drawn. So that will mark the end of the part of definition of terms. So upon finishing the definition of terms, that will lead me to the second subtopic, of which that will be what? Types of sampling. Now types of sampling. Now when we talk about sampling, we say sampling is a process. Now here now we want to talk about the types of sampling. Now when we talk about types of sampling, we only have 2 types of sampling. In number 1, we have the probability sampling or random sampling. And number 2, we have non-probability sampling or non-random sampling. So type 1, probability sampling, and type 2, non-probability sampling. Now in most of the occasion, we will get a question, maybe an examination, asking you to differentiate between probability sampling and non-probability sampling. So simply, probability sampling, it is the type of sampling where each sample has a known or equal chances of being selected. Underline the term random. I'll say something about random sampling. So probability sampling is also known as what? Random. And we are saying with probability sampling, this is a type of sampling where each sample, underline, each sample has an equal chance. And I also the term equal chance of being selected. For example, I'm teaching a class of 20 candidates, and I want to do a research or a study on that class. So meaning my sample or my population will be the 20 candidates, some of the 20 students. Now, if I were to select, for example, I've been asked by the head of the department, assume I'm using applied science department, to select the number, to select maybe 4 students that will present the school, the applied department in a symposium or on a applied research, maybe somewhere, or a competition somewhere. And then I come to a class as the trainer, then I stand there without no judgment, then I say, student, not even mention them, say you and you and you and you come. Now that's what we call random. All the students are gathered, or all the samples are gathered in the same bucket, the same thing. Then they are being selected randomly, meaning during the selection of that random selection, each and every sample stands an equal chance of being selected. Like there is no biasness. For example, if I say you and you and you and you come out, meaning you and you and you and you can be anyone. It is not specific, so and so, and I'm not mentioning them. So you and you, meaning each and every sample in my class stand an equal chance of being selected. Now, number 2, we talk about non-probability sampling. Now here, non-probability sampling is the vice versa of the probability sampling. Now, if the probability sampling is each sample must has a known or stand an equal chance of being selected, then now the non-probability will be the reverse. And we said that non-probability is also known as what? Non-random sampling. So meaning, now here, when doing selection, will now depend on the researcher judgmental. For example, I'm asked again by the head of the Department of Applied Science to provide the number of students, maybe 4 or 5, to participate in a mathematics contest in a certain institution. Now, this probability kind of non-probability kind of sampling now will depend on the researcher judgment. So it will be judgment. So I'll be having specific. Maybe I'll choose based on what? Performance. So I may use the previous exam performance, and I may choose my best class. So I may choose from number 1, number 4. Those who scored the best marks from that's number 1, number 4. Meaning now my selection is not random. It is non-random, meaning my judgment will determine who is going and who is not going. Now that is the difference between probability and non-probability. The first one, all the sample stand equal chance. The second one, all the sample does not have the equal chance. It depends on what? Selection depends on the researcher's what? Judgment. Now lastly, before I finish, part 1 of my presentation today, now we're having examples of probability sampling. Now, under probability sampling and unprobability sampling will be having, for example, each. And example 1 will be simple random sampling. Underline simple random sampling, also underline probability sampling is also known as what? Random sampling. Number 2, kuna systematic sampling. Number 3, we'll have stratified sampling. Stratified sampling. Number 4, we'll have cluster sampling, and that will mark the first batch of our probability sampling. Then example 2 will be what? Example of non-probability sampling. And also there I'm going to highlight, for example, and example 1 will be what? Quarter sampling. Then number 2 will be snowball sampling. Snow, then ball sampling. Then number 3 will be what? Judgmental stroke purposive sampling. Remember, under non-probability sampling indicated that the researcher, the selection depends on what? Researcher judgments. And now here we are having what? We call judgmental stroke purposive sampling. Then the last one will be what? Convenience sampling. So that will mark the end of my part 1 presentation for today. Then in my next class, I'm going to start by defining these examples of both probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Thank you.